All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for making the time. Good morning from sunny but chilly Nairobi. We're very excited to be starting this East Africa Unlocked webinar series today. My name is Tim Dagori Moirori. I am the Senior Startup and Innovation Manager here at the Advantage Austria office in Nairobi. And we are really excited about starting today's webinar series with Kenya. Allow me to convey apologies from Mr. Andreas Pfleger, our commercial counselor. Unfortunately, he's unable to join us as he's on assignment in Ethiopia, and he's currently in another meeting right now, so there's a bit of a clash. But he'd have loved to be here, so receive his apologies and highest regards. So without much further ado, I want to introduce Her Excellency Ambassador Valerie Rugene, the Deputy Head of Mission, Kenya Embassy, and the Permanent Mission to the United Nations in Vienna, to give some of her remarks.
Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can see and hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tim Moirore, and also the entire team from Austrian Embassy in Kenya, also known as Advantage Austria in Nairobi. Thank you very much also for inviting me here, and to all the speakers who will speak after me and the attendees here this morning to just discuss about the continent's startup powerhouse. You gave me 3 to 5 minutes, so you know I'm a Kenyan, and Kenyans, we talk a lot. However, I'm lucky to be in Austria because then I've learned the art of speaking less, but with impact. So thank you very much. So on the topic that we're discussing today, the continent's startup powerhouse, I just want to say 3 things, only 3 things. And the first one, I want to talk about the statistics that we have currently, that in the year 2050, a quarter of the world will live and work in Africa, a quarter of the world. And when I look at the situation here in Vienna, rather in Austria, plus the other countries that we represent, which is Croatia, Hungary, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Ukraine. And actually about 21. So the question is, where do we see ourselves in the context of Kenya? Where are we? Where is the journey? Where are we right now? The things or the aspects in the Kenyan space that place us really central to the future of the world. As you all know, Kenya boasts a dynamic entrepreneurial ecosystem and a strong. Yeah. Kenya is known as a Silicon Savannah. Everybody knows. M-Pesa, which is Kenya's FinTech leadership. Again, we as a country have government policies that are youthful, that are tech savvy, population driven. You recall the story of the gentleman who the president loved to refer to, a gentleman, I think by the name of Dennis, who worked in Kenya and worked for a German company, and I think earned about 150 Kenya shillings in a month. Yeah. So these are the kind of things that we're talking about. And again, going back to the story of the median age, we have a population that is so qualified. They have gone to school, either up to the degree, bachelor's degree level, and being Kenyan, very ambitious to go into the master's level, and also brave enough or ambitious enough to also want to go and do a PhD. And this is the problem that is presented when we talk about underemployment. It is because in our quest for knowledge and our nature being so aggressive as Kenyans and competitive and wanting to be the best, we have a population that is overqualified, more qualified than the jobs that are available in Kenya. And this is what now drives us to becoming innovative so that we can create the jobs ourselves, other than looking out of the country for the job opportunities. Yeah. But still, Kenya being Kenya and being strategically located, even on our tourism sector, where we have so many sites and attractions as a country. Work-wise, remember we have the 4th United Nations headquarters in Kenya, in Nairobi, and that is the 4th one after Vienna. So Kenya attracts significant local and international investment. And I can tell you this from where I sit, that representing Kenya abroad is quite interesting. I wanted to say easy, but it's not that easy, but we have a name. There's a name, there's a lot of love, of liking, of fame behind the brand called Kenya. That really the first choice when you talk about Africa, because European likes talking in terms of Africa. They say, oh, you're from Africa. Nobody says you're from Kenya. But when they think of Africa, Kenya always comes. Yeah. So we have a lot of opportunities as a country. And like I've just said in summary, because I want to close, I see a team giving me the eye, is that in closing, one is that we have an advantage just by being Kenyan. We have a beautiful, well-located country called Kenya. We have a very educated workforce, and a young one, and a vibrant one, and one that is in the age bracket of 19, moving on. And we just have the dynamic, which is a natural entrepreneurial ecosystem, and also a digital infrastructure. There are people who know Kenya so we have all these things, and probably more, that make Kenya the #1 or a country of choice for investments and partnerships. Let me stop there for now, and I'm happy to listen in to input from the other speakers. Thank you very much, team.
All right, thank you very much, Ambassador. We really appreciate your remarks. I think for me, as I always say, Kenya and Austria might look worlds apart, but when it comes to innovation, we have more in common than most people think, and for me, just to reiterate what the ambassador has said, one, there's a strong startup cultures. Nairobi is a major hub in Africa, especially known for fintech. Vienna is gaining ground in Europe with a fast-growing startup ecosystem. And then two, there's talent, as Ambassador has said, young, talented, tech-savvy populations in both countries. And three, market access. Austria offers a gateway to the rest of Europe, and Kenya offers a gateway to the rest of East Africa and even the whole of Africa. Thank you very much for that, Ambassador. So I'll introduce the speakers very quickly. I'll start with Dr. Robert Karanja. Dr. Karanja is the founder and executive director, BioLinks Africa. Previously, he was the co-founder and chief innovation officer at Vilgro Africa. And he's the immediate former chairperson, correct me, Dr. Karanja, the immediate former chairperson of the Association of Startup and SME Enablers of Kenya. Dr. Karanja will be speaking on the structure, growth, and future of Kenya's startup ecosystem from an ecosystem enabler standpoint. Dr. Karanja is a very significant and I think seasoned figure in the ecosystem. And then we also have Mr. Sandeep Main, who's the partner and head of private enterprise, KPMG East Africa. He'll be providing insights on investor confidence, market readiness, and corporate startup engagement in Kenya from a regional advisory perspective. And then finally, we have engineer Ian Minjire, who's a co-founder, Melanin Capital, and he'll be sharing practical lessons from expanding a startup from Europe to Kenya, including market entry, localization, and growth opportunities. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us today. I think to open, I'll ask each one of you the big question: why Kenya? From your perspective, why is Kenya the right place for innovation, tech, growth, or investment? We can start with you, Dr. Karanja.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks. To me, that's a fairly simple question, partly because I'm seated in Nairobi and lived and grown up in Kenya. And my argument is always very simple: just come and see. Because sometimes when you talk about it, people are like, really? What I think I love about Kenya in terms of the startup ecosystem is really driven by the people. We have an economy that is counted among the bigger ones. And, this is interesting to me because almost every other country you compare us with tends to be either involved in oil or some sort of minerals or something. And when you come to Kenya, you realize this is an economy that's really just powered by the people. Very strong can-do attitude, lots of ingenuity, lots of not waiting for things to happen, but just trying to make things happen. And I think that go-getter attitude is the number one sweet spot for me. And the other thing that I think has been a blessing, especially now when you think of looking at a regional or a Pan-African angle, is this aspect of being a hub. It's not a small thing to have that UN office here in Nairobi, for example, because it basically then means that for a very long time, we've taken things like our logistics and our access to other capitals in Africa for granted. But when you think about it, you typically have to travel through a lot of, it's a lot of gymnastics traveling in Africa. And you really realize you only have like 3 airlines that can usually connect you across, like direct flights to the different capitals. It's Kenyan Airways, Ethiopian Airways, and South African Airways that typically will have these multiple connections, direct flights to different cities across the continent. So if you want to do work with a Pan-African approach or a regional approach, you don't have too many choices. You kind of need to have your hub set up in one of those cities, Nairobi, Joburg, Addis. Typically, others will be forced to get those transit visas to go through places, either Europe, or you have to go to Dubai, or what have you. So to me, I think I find we have some natural advantages that have made us a regional let me say, the entryway into the region, into the greater East African region, and that lends itself to doing good commerce, doing business, and having the ability to think regionally, even when you talk about domestic market. The East African community has been taking shape, and by and large, you realize moving from a domestic market of 50 million to I think about twice that, a little over twice that, is quite amazing. It's not even twice that, because if you think of it, Tanzania, Uganda alone, we are almost 3 times of Kenya. Then you add DRC now, and you add Somalia, and you add South Sudan, and you realize there's something to be said here. We have some ways to go, obviously, in terms of making this community come together, basic things like the currency issues. But to me, the fact that I can move around freely without having to go through visa applications is a big deal, because that's not common again. So to me, I always say, if you're really thinking about doing business in Africa and you are thinking of an entry point, I'd always recommend Kenya as a good place to start, because then you get these basic advantages that it's harder to do things when you're in other countries.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry.
Back to you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Main. Why Kenya?
Yes, thank you so much. And I think Daktari has really well covered in terms of the infrastructure and the logistics. Indeed, when you set up a business in Kenya, and I'm looking at it from a client experience perspective, we have a number of multinationals that are set up in Kenya, but then they work from here as a hub, and then have their branches or their presence across not just East, but the wider Africa. But for me, what really stands out as the most important one is really what Her Excellency talked about, which is the skilled labor. We do have ample labor in Kenya, and very skilled labor. In fact, Kenya is also known to export a lot of its labor outside, even the African market. But that notwithstanding, I think if I look at it even from a policy and legislation perspective, I am aware the last maybe 2 years have been a bit erratic. But generally, the tax and the policy environment in Kenya has been quite stable. The government uses a lot of automation, so the businesses are linked in the sense that immediately you register a company or a branch, you would automatically get your tax identification number. So it becomes a very seamless and a very short process. In the past, this could take you almost about 2 months. But now within 10 days or less, you have a fully fledged company, which I think is really important if you want to go to speed to market. And for me, the more important one is really the special economic zones and the export processing zones that Kenya has. We always had the EPZs and the SEZs for goods, but now more recently, I think last year, we actually gazetted special economic zones for services, which makes it a very good hub in the event you are, in the financial services sector, for example, and you're providing a shared service center. Then incorporating in the SEZ is really beneficial because you get a lot of tax incentives. The income tax rate is 10%. It's lower than the 30%, for example. There's no withholding tax on repatriation of royalties, dividends. And this is all done to sort of enhance or bring in FDIs, to attract investors, to attract hubs to set up in Kenya, and then expand from Kenya into the rest of Africa and beyond. So I'm going to take a pause there and then hand back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Main. Engineer Minjere, from the perspective of a founder, why Kenya?
Thank you so much, Tim, and sorry for jumping in late. For Kenya, I think since I have not heard some of the others, maybe if I repeat, I apologize. I think Kenya, just the way it's situated also in Africa, if you want to scale into Africa, the fact that we're sort of at the center, even from a geographical manner, it helps you a lot. So after the space that I'm working in sort of climate fintech space, we've had a lot of things we had to go for, and it's been super simple to take it out of Kenya. I could have gone north easily, south easily, west or east. So that to me is already an advantage when you want to get access to all of that. Also, the base of a lot of African operations of most of the other businesses that you want are in Kenya. So instead of taking a flight, it might be a walk across your street if you're in the right place. And you will just have a lot of the Africa vision starting from and through Kenya, whether it's, even if you look at, as much as the AU sits on the other side, a lot of the meetings are right here between Kenya and Ethiopia. Of course, Ethiopia's, and the difficult, and the different things around also the type of lifestyle you can get here. So I've had the privilege of living in Europe for probably 7 years, in Germany especially, then of course coming back to Kenya, and there was nothing that matches the kind of environment you might have there that we give you here, from the type of ecosystems, from the type of startup sectors, and even the thinking of people is quite aligned to that. And obviously the easiest one is also language. Any other side you go becomes heavily French, and on the other side you might find other different languages. So you might find that we're heavily professional English here that will allow you to be able to feel like you're already able to connect on different many levels. And obviously, I like to tell guys, startup is hard, you know, and anyone else, probably my other colleagues here, understand that about it. So Kenya just offers you both sides. It offers you the ability to be at a very difficult working environment in terms of, let's say if you're in tech, you're able to have the right skills around you that support you. But on the weekend, you can be on the beach in Diani, and the other one on a mountain in Mount Kenya. So you wouldn't find this as a mixed, powerful option of this sort in most of these countries. So if you find something in the true north, then chances are you're not going to be able to have access to some of the privileges I'm telling you. And yeah, just the fact that we're around the equator, we have very good temperatures, so we don't have any strong winters or things of the sort. So it gives you the perfect environment to kill two birds with stone. It's like, you know, build the biggest business you can while living your best life, if I have to look at it like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I like that. One weekend you can be on a beach in Diani, the next on Mount Kenya. So I want to go back to you, Dr. Karanja, as someone who's been in the ecosystem for a while. Maybe tell us, outline how Kenya's startup ecosystem has evolved over the last couple of years. Where were we at and where are we right now?
Yeah, thanks. I think maybe just to kind of paint a picture, as the ambassador said, the biggest name everybody will hear is M-Pesa, and I mean, there's nothing that has had so much transformational impact in terms of the way we do just about everything. But within it, you'll also realize that it was a big wake-up call to the financial sector. I think there's so much fintech innovation happening within our banks that we now kind of take for granted. But the trailblazer, of course, was Safaricom. And if you look at it, you realize increasingly we have our banks also operating outside of Kenya. A lot of them, Equity, KCB, and others. And you realize that we've been an exporter of tech services and tech. And even M-Pesa now itself has started to scale into Ethiopia and things like that. So fintech has been really the big, I'd say, what has been the flagship of the startup ecosystem. And what it has done is it kind of opened people's eyes. And what we've seen is other sectors beginning to ask how, observing what are the lessons to learn from fintech? What does it take to build this kind of success? And today I can see a lot happening. If you talk of climate, for example, there's a lot of work happening. KCIC, the UNDP hub for climate is taking shape in Konza. And I mean, so there's been so many, moving from fintech and just being sector agnostic after that, what you've seen has been now a lot more specialization. Myself, I've operated in the health space for the last 10 years. Initially, we were the first indigenous health sector incubator and early stage investor. And now I look at it and you realize, hey, people are seeing the value of going deep and operating in a much more better defined space so that you have the depth to go the long haul. And that's true for agriculture, for energy, for I think there's lots of even the hardware innovation. We have maker spaces that are really just thinking, how do we speak up to manufacturing, to tangible hardware products that are also taking place, gearbox, I think IOMI in Lamu and places like that. So to me, I look at it and you realize the biggest thing I see that's been happening over the last few years has been this kind of sector focus. Another thing that has also been happening very quietly, but for me it's super exciting because I'm an academic at heart, is the entrepreneurial culture beginning to penetrate the academia. And here we're talking of the universities and the research institutions, because we've had, talk of sleeping giants. I think this has been one of the biggest sleeping giants when you think of our ecosystem in terms of the knowledge base. For our startup ecosystem has always been the innovation hubs, the accelerators, the incubators, with very little coming out of academia. But now we started seeing universities starting to say, what exactly is this that we're talking about? How do we partner? How do we become part of the startup ecosystem? How do they change their culture to be entrepreneurial culture? And beginning to see spin-offs starting to come out of the research that's happening within our academic knowledge base. And to me, that's also really exciting. It's a very different flavor of startup because it's equally knowledge intensive, but I think it has a lot more of investment that has gone into the R&D prior to the entrepreneurial capital coming in or the risk capital coming in. But the fact that that is also happening is quite exciting for me, especially in agriculture and in the health space, the life sciences specifically. I think that there's a lot that's going to be happening there that's going to pretty much start to get into ascendancy in the next 2-3 years. But right now, I can tell you, Onisha used to talk to fellows, the professors and the doctors and tell them, hey, this is how much money came, Kenyan startups were able to mobilize last year. And they look at me thinking, this guy is making these numbers up. Show me where those millions that you're talking about. Now, last year, the spin-offs from the Kenyan academia did actually mobilize about $1 million. So if you think about it, I'm like, wow, this is amazing, because before it was like hearsay and they were not really believing, and it changes the mindset when people start understanding. It's not about lack of capital. It's about understanding market opportunities and how to translate some of these big things like the SDGs to say, where is the business here? Sustainability can only happen when there's a business angle to it. And all the research that's happening in the name of SDGs across all 17 of them, how do you then start to translate them into actual products and services that can deliver that development? So to me, I see a lot of aspects happening. The other one that has been massive for me is having a 10-year master plan as a country, which was launched about a year ago at the Kenya Innovation Week by the President of Kenya. That for the first time now, besides saying there is a manufacturing policy and priorities, there is academic R&D priorities. We now actually have a national roadmap that guides us for the next 10 years on what are we doing, what's our agenda in as far as innovation, and how, and the benefit of that is that it starts speaking to all the multiple government agencies that are relevant, plus the private sector, plus the development actors. And when you start getting people, it's always innovation or ecosystem building is always like herding cats. we don't come together naturally. It takes a lot of convincing and selling of a vision and getting people to buy into a vision to start understanding this is how, if this is going to happen, how do I position myself? How do I participate in this? And I think that's beginning to also take shapes. So I look at the next 2 years has been probably more the same. I see a lot of regional innovation systems happening. I see them being driven by cluster development. I see, for example, if you're looking at places like Kisumu, blue economy being the key, people starting to organize around clusters that speak to geographical and other, what do I call them? Other drivers or what makes them competitive, so that if you are in Rift Valley, it will not be what exactly is happening in Mount Kenya, for example, or what's happening in Mombasa, or what's happening in Isiolo, because people will start asking, okay, so what's our competitive strength? How do we start building economic clusters that speak to our natural competitive edge to be able to elevate our game so that we're now globally competitive? So that thinking of specialization, because again, going back to, I think what all of us have been saying, number one factor for Kenya is the talent. The talent is there, and this talent is deep. The question has always been, how do we harness it? And if we're able to start harnessing it correctly, not for the microfinance, micro SME agenda, but for big thinking that creates, big value chains and big companies that create jobs, I think the transformation is already underway.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Karanja. And it's true, Kenya actually is the birthplace of mobile money, if you like, with M-Pesa. And I think we've come a long way, you're right. Like you, I'm also very excited about some of the things that are happening. Like you put it correctly, I think one of the signs of a maturing startup ecosystem or tech ecosystem is definitely how we're now clustering around sectors or even areas within the country. And then the same when it comes to now academia, having them on board. So, Mr. Main, I'd just like to now jump to you. When it comes to international capital flowing into Kenya, generally, and even in the tech and innovation scene, what are you seeing? What are some of the things you're seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Tim. So looking at it from a 2020, let me take you back to 2023 and 2024. So 2023 was a really difficult year, not just for Kenya, but I think generally from an African perspective, the inflows, for foreign capital, so acquisitions and M&A was really slow. But then in 2024, there was an upward of about $630 or so million for Africa, and so for Kenya. And then it appears that Kenya was actually the largest of that chunk. So there was the top contenders from an African perspective is really Nigeria, Kenya, and I think Egypt, if I look upwards. But that tells you that indeed there has been a significant inflow of capital, and the mergers and acquisitions have happened. There's a lot of entities, multinationals that have then come, as opposed to setting up a new business. You look at an existing business, whether it's in fintech or agri or manufacturing, and say, look, if this is already aligned to our values and our culture, and there's a potential growth, then we shall acquire. And looking now into the first half of 2025, I do see a slight slowdown, to be very honest, in terms of the inflows, but it's actually looking up towards the second half, and I think that has been the norm as far as the M&A is concerned. So the startups themselves, like we talked about sectors, and I'm just going to digress slightly. What are investors really looking at when they're coming in and saying, this is what I want to do in this particular part of the world, Kenya and then into Africa? So it really goes towards what governments and what the Kenyan government is also giving as a priority. And just off the back of the recent finance bill, you'll see the major ones, and I'll just talk about maybe the top three. that come to mind is really education got the highest allocation, and then you had the health and you have infrastructure. Within that, there are many other allocations that the government has done, but these three got a significant chunk of the budget allocations, and that tells you the level of commitment the Kenyan government has to these particular sectors. And I think that's, again, a very important conversation when you're talking about FDI. Then which sectors should one then come and invest in? So health tech, education tech, has remained top of mind. So technology, whether it's a payment company like the fintechs, or whether it's to agri, or whether it's to health, still remains a very key priority. And when we talk about innovation, I think for me, where I stand and where I sit, Kenya is really the most innovative, to my mind, at least from an East African perspective, having led that charge for new development. And Dr. I talked about, M-Pesa, which is now a blueprint for the rest of the world, to be very honest. So for me, I think that's where the investors are coming in, and that's what they look at, or that's what should be looked at before you sort of decide where you want to come in. But I must say, my personal opinion would be Kenya also is very strong in the agri space, but we haven't gotten that level of commitment or that level of, support from an infrastructure perspective when we talk about the agri, expanding that agri space. But generally, from an FDI perspective and what investors would be looking at, then it would be to align to what are the priorities of the government. And by the way, these are not very different from what's happening across East Africa and Africa. Security is also one really big thing. And I was fortunate to be part of a global conference at some point last year. And where we are moving towards is really defense tech. And a lot of the conversations are, why are governments allocating significant chunks of budgets, towards defense? I guess it's because we are trying to beef up security both internally and externally. So I think that's where I'll stop, Tim, just to give you a bit of a flavor.
Thank you. I want to go to you, Ian. And of course, you're Kenyan, but lived in Europe for a while and then came back to set up your business here, along with your co-founder. What was your biggest surprise when launching in Kenya, coming from Europe compared to Europe? And what advice would you give a European founder entering Kenya for the first time?
Okay. With that question, team, first, I think I'll try and explain the fact that also my co-founder is of West African origin. Okay, they're mixed, West African, French, German, but have grown up in Europe all their life, so France and Germany. So they may as well have not had that much experience in a location like Kenya. And with this, I think the best advice I can give according to that is always work with a local. So, and don't view, for example, Kenya itself or Africa as a place where you already have the solution coming from Europe that you're going to employ here, because that could lead you into serious failure. You have to think of it as you might have maybe some solutions that you can then blend with a local to give you real context. It's not so easy to just copy and paste it here. And sometimes you must also see this as an environment to learn even newer innovations, because the type of environment we have allows for innovations to happen. Let me give an example. And unfortunately, I'll just use Germany because it's where I was for a long time. Everything's super structured. So some of the solutions that you're building are heavily embedded on the structure and platforms that you already have. So your solution, when it comes back here to Kenya, may not totally fit, but may need someone who now understands our different type of ways that things move around here for it then to become a success. And even the whole M-Pesa discussion that Dr. was speaking about is a combination of the two merging together and finding a way to have some challenges that were only, maybe not special to Kenya, but let's put it in Africa for that solution to come up. If that solution were pasted for somewhere else, it would never work. And that's why it was built by the people here and for the people here. And that's why I think that solution was able to scale. And going back to it, like I've explained, it's having the right partnerships that will help you scale. So working with the people here, and like I said, having the right mindset. The mindset that you're not bringing sort of the solution, or you're not coming to sort of save a situation here. You're coming to learn from them and also solve the problem with them. So if I can give maybe a direct example to my area. So 80% of Europe is a banked population. So when you enter the fintech space, your solutions already have heavy data behind them, because then you have banking institutions that can give you different data about different businesses or different consumers that allows you to maybe, for example, say what kind of solutions you want to build. But if you ever think of, I think they might know it from Austria, a neobank that was called N26. This vision was not started by someone that sat in Germany and thought, okay, we're 80% unbanked, we're solved. It came from someone going to other places, for example, like Kenya, where you find that our banking institutions have technology that is 10 times faster, ability to move money is 10 times faster. So when you have that information, you might actually even be able to build a solution for your own country, which you thought you had already solved. And even with N26, I think it grew out of Deutsche Bank to become bigger than Deutsche Bank, to become number one's largest bank, because they understood that the challenge of an 80% bank population was actually around the tech around it, and obviously the customer interaction that they were able to build among the people. And you can only learn that by coming to an environment that is a bit more diverse and that allows for more innovation to happen, because innovation happens in this sort of environments, not in places where everything's extremely structured. So that could be helpful for some of them who've built their knowledge purely in Austria, and stepping out of that will open your mind to solutions that you could scale in Africa or even back home, because now you have the flip side. And especially, like I said, working with locals gives you that different experience. The beauty of also Kenya, if I also understand how Austria, similar to Germany, works, there's heavy STEM background, and these people have similar ways of thinking, which is also about among Kenyans. You will find yourself as someone from Europe easily sort of connecting with Kenyans, because we have similar types and levels of education, similar backgrounds. It's not going to be the same if you try other parts of Africa, because we are not sort of thinking in similar ways. So that's one thing I can say that I saw was easier coming back here for me, or even my co-founder who was trying to get into the space. And all the challenges that you could face, like I said, will be solved by having a partner on ground that understands what the people need to do. So that was my big experience. But of course, as we come back to Kenya, I'm sorry, Ambassador, I'm taking your role. It is the advantages I got from running away from the weather, all the other difficulties that are never talked about around difficulty of running a business could be based on factors that sometimes have nothing to do with business. You know, you will just innovate more at the base of Mount Kenya or by Diani, but thank you for that.
No. I think, Ian, you bring up quite an important point that sometimes often gets forgotten. And I think the lifestyle also of founders is important, being able to build in a space that is good. Even now, as we speak more about mental health. I want to go back to you, Sandeep.
And sorry, team, before I finish that, they also have the advantage of direct flights to Nairobi. Sorry, I was in and out so many times. So that's something they can take advantage of. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Although I think for Austria, they would first need to fly to Frankfurt. I'm not sure. Maybe Ambassador can confirm that for us. So, Sandeep, going back to you, other than calling you, what would you advise an Austrian company evaluating entry into East Africa through Kenya? What are some of the legal or regulatory nuances foreign founders should be aware of? And I know you talked a little about the tax implications, etc.
Thanks for that. I think for me, over and above tax, it's exactly what has been said previously. It's about know your product, know your market. Something that works maybe out there, might not really work in Kenya, or might not even work in Africa. I have been part of incubators that, the product is really, really good, but it is far ahead of its time, meaning that if it was to be released today, it would not take traction. So I think for me, as an investor comes in or as a company comes in, it would be important. Yes, it's working for your market, it's working in Austria, but would that service or product actually work in a Kenyan and then by extension an African setting? So that's one, even before you move into the tax and regulatory, conversations. And then, yes, the second one would be really setup. Setup is very, very important. So do you want to set up a direct subsidiary of the Austrian company in Kenya, or do you want to explore a more, tax friendly jurisdiction? And a lot of the businesses, and I deal a lot with startups, I must say, have moved their holdco to jurisdictions like Delaware, to Mauritius, to Dubai. Because it's easier to raise funds from there. So it goes beyond tax, actually. It is more about where would other investors feel comfortable. Maybe I want to spin off the business in about 7 years or 10 years. Where can I easily get another investor to come in at? So it's about your strategy. It's about your vision. How quick do you want to spin off this entity? How do you want to fundraise? Where do you think you want to register the IP? That's a very important conversation. Are the Kenyan laws the best for you to register your IP, or do you think maybe Dubai would be great? Or the UK, by the way, has the largest treaty network, across the globe. So it's very important to take those into consideration. And then I would tell you, get the right consultant. So yes, call Sandeep, because it's very important. Calls are free. It's very important just to get the knowledge on ground. Google is not your friend. It can give you a lot of information, but the information you get when you do your independent researches, and this is what I've seen goes wrong, is that you can get different pieces of information about the same thing. Let's talk about setup. I could get setup costs, or doing a setup, I need to do 1, 2, 3 things, but then the same search would give me a different aspect of setting up. So I think it's really important to collaborate that with an on-the-ground consultant. And some of these things, we do a lot of this as our investment. Just a call for 30, 45 minutes is not going to, do anything. It's a business development call for me, but just get the information right. Sometimes I always tell everyone, including startups, that cheap is expensive. So you might want to pay something small just to ensure that you got the right level of support as you get into a new market. This is the market you are not familiar with. So getting it right from the onset is really, really critical. And I think the benefit of Kenya is everything is automated. Even if you're sitting in Austria, you can log in, file a return from there. If it's a tax return, file your secretarial return online, navigate your bank accounts online. So all that makes it very simple, where you have technology and innovation. I'm going to take a pause there, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Karanja, you've been in the ecosystem for a while. You're the former chairperson at ASEC, the Association of Startup and SME Enablers of Kenya. What infrastructure or support systems can you maybe speak to from that perspective are already in place for foreign or Austrian startups that they can immediately plug into?
Yeah, thank you. And the first thing I think I'd want to point out is going back to what Ian and Sandeep have just mentioned, is you need to have on the ground info and connections. And within ASEC, for example, you will find incubators, accelerators, innovation hubs, literally across the country, doing all sorts of different things. And as I mentioned earlier, there's increasingly a lot of specialization. And the reason I say that is because people, when you think of Africa, you just put yourself in the foreign investors' shoes, or even a startup founder shoes, and you're thinking, I have this idea. And this happens a lot, for example, in the health sector, in the global health R&D. There's more global health R&D happening in Europe, for example, than in Africa. But they don't understand, how do you translate, how do you get that product into the market? And we basically curate the community of practitioners within the ASEC membership. so that if you want to understand who do I talk to on this very specific issue, it's very easy to understand, to end up at the right hub, and within the right hub, who is the right person to talk to. Right now, I think we've seen sadly, I think over the last couple of years, a lot of amazing startups that have basically just shut down because of the funding issue that Main mentioned. It's been a slowdown, and so the startups that were basically doing a lot of amazing stuff basically just ran out of cash. But that talent is still here. And that talent, when I think about it, should not be wasted. You know, if you are telling me you want to come into Africa today, you want to come into Kenya, I'd be like, hey, I know so and so. They were the CTO, they were the CFO, they were this and that. They were employee number 10, 11, you know, because they have that founder mentality and culture and experience, just almost as much as the founders actually do. And so when you're able to understand, and how do you locate them, you really just want to be part of the ecosystem, and that's what ASEC basically does for you. Second thing is, I think, the element of trust, because trust is difficult. So when I talk of curation, I mean curation in the sense of if you want to know whether I'm good or not, you need to ask people who are in the health sector, because if I've tarnished my name, it won't be a secret. You will know, and so on and so forth. So the idea of how do you tap into this community of practitioners to identify really great candidates that you can partner with and that can kind of collaborate or partner with you to bring your ideas to market. And as I said, there's so many solutions that I've seen developed for Africa out there in Europe, in North America, in Japan, that have got no clue how to come in. And I always think to myself, what a waste. How can we also grab that? Even as we innovate locally, how can we ensure that, again, it's a global village, can we be able to tap into the amount of investment that has been done in those markets, looking at us as a market, but without a way in?
All right, thank you very, very much. Gentlemen, I'll give you 1 minute each to maybe make some final remarks before we get into a quick Q&A. We can start with you, Ian. Sorry, Ian, you're muted.
Well, apologies. So like closing remarks or something about a specific topic?
In general, what would you say as you close?
Let me see. Assuming everyone on the call is around this sort of startup space or considering moving their business, they don't have to be in startup. I think if you're considering Africa, I don't see why you would choose any other place other than Kenya, all the way from the aspects that have been raised by my fellow co-hosts, from the environment, what you need to learn here, the innovation, ability to access specific types of lifestyle, ability to scale from this is the best place to scale our skill. So with that, I'd be like, I'm looking forward to see you guys in Nairobi. And that's pretty much from me and my end. And thank you for the chance.
Thank you. Dr. Karanja.
Yeah, thanks. I think I may want to highlight just one other element that I think is really powerful that is hidden. We just have a very robust legal and policy framework that speaks to all matters innovation. So if you think of M-Pesa, that in itself took a lot of wisdom to midwife it, because this was something emerging from the telecos that, coming into the banking sector. And of course, there's a lot of fight to kill it. But the government had the wisdom to manage that and make sure that the innovation was not killed by existing legislation or policies. And even without the benefit of a sandbox, we created quote-unquote ad hoc sandbox for M-Pesa and all these other fintechs that came after it. And today you come into Kenya, you realize this. We really lead in a lot of the policy frameworks and regulatory frameworks. Pest Control Board of Kenya, for example, is a big part of why the agricultural sector is a success. We have regulations for things like biological controls that allows us then to be able to do our horticulture and sell to markets like Europe, where they're looking for green, organic, and so on and so forth. Go look for other places in the region where you have those policy and regulatory frameworks in the books. Things like even the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, for example, it's actually on paper it's a maturity level 1, but the depth within the actual agency is at maturity level 3. It's just that there's some things that need to be paid for to then establish a few departments here and there. But in a sense, they're already doing the work, even without the accreditation. And that's why, again, you look at the local pharmaceutical manufacturing, Kenya ends up being a leader in the regional hub within COMESA. And I can continue, the Communications Authority of Kenya, now they do have a regulatory sandbox. We do have one for InsurTech. We do have one. So you think about it, internet penetration, there's been a lot of investment that has gone to say, how do we ensure that if you're coming here, you can get a regulatory pathway that makes sense, and where it doesn't, we have a government that has a track record of meeting with people and understanding how can we get things done.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Main.
Thanks, Tim. And I think for me, I'll be very brief. Why Kenya? Dr. has talked about it a lot in terms of the infrastructure and the policies and processes that are there to accommodate new businesses. But I think for me, what I'll say is that the ecosystem in Kenya is also very strong. Reach out to any other co-founder or any of the founder, and they'll be able to also give you a very good understanding of how to operate in Kenya. So that ecosystem, that openness from a Kenyan business perspective is very rare. I can assure you that if you try and reach out to another business, say in the rest of Africa, it might be a different conversation, but at least from a Kenyan perspective, the founders are very open in sharing their success stories and where they have failed. So that in itself is also a very unique culture that we have as Kenya. And then obviously the infrastructure and the tax legislation and the policies that have already been mentioned. If there is a particular one that you feel is going to make an impact for the government as you're moving into this country, the government is also very open to having conversations on what can be done to change legislation to then accommodate this mega project that you intend. And we did this very recently. Well, recent to me, but not very recent to most, but would be like, say, for the wind power project. There were a lot of exemptions that they got because they were coming in and making an impact to try and reduce the cost of electricity. So the exemptions from the government perspective were there. So that in itself shows you the goodwill of the government itself to try and accommodate new business and innovation. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Any final closing remarks before you go into the Q&A?
Yes, certainly. I've really enjoyed listening to Sandeep and Dr. Karanja, and Ian. Is very, very nice to see you. Tim, I don't know if I told you that before moving to Vienna, I served in Berlin, Germany.
Okay.
And so I just moved here 8 months ago, and so it's good to see Ian still at it, the same, still pursuing biashara and trying to elevate Kenya. Yeah, but on my closing remarks, I want to start with something that Ian said when he was apologizing for doing my work, and say that something that I always preach is that really the real ambassadors of Kenya is not us. It is every Kenyan, and especially the Kenyans who are serving Kenya abroad. And it is ambassadors like Sandeep also and Dr. Karanja who have all this information about investing in Kenya or even traveling to Kenya, and how well you use that information. That, for me, I say you guys are the real ambassadors. And because Kenyans love Kenya, really, the only thing you do is do. Thank you so much. But having said that, it is that ambassadorial job that leads us to an aspect I'd like to call networking. And Sandeep, you talked about this when Tim asked you to explain or to speak to an Austrian investor wanting to come and invest in Kenya. What would you advise them to do? And I like the response you give. That first things first, do the research, understand the environment. And I would like to speak as an Austrian or German. Germans and Austrians do a lot of research before embarking into whether it's Kenya or whatever, any other country. They only develop an interest on something that they've seen great potential. Yeah. But the question to me remains, how well do we hold this person? How well do we welcome them into the country? How well do we ensure that that business actually takes flight in Kenya? When I was in Germany, Germany is very entrepreneurial, and Germans love it. And Germany is the first country to recognize Kenya as an independent country. And so the number plate number one is German. And Germans love Kenya, no matter what you guys do, no matter what political drama you exhibit. They just love Kenya naturally. I mean, you've seen the ambassador. Sometimes he goes on Capital FM, he does the jazz shows. I mean, he tries to speak his Swahili, he's all over the place, even in places that you guys, I'm sure, have not been to. So the thing is, and I spoke about this when I started, we've already sold ourselves. Yeah, we've already sold Kenya. Kenya is sold. But how well now do we make use of that? And I think we really go wrong. And I want to challenge you, team. That is a job that you should be doing where you're seated. We should be having, I expected to have an Austrian on this platform.
Austrian desk.
So it's them that we are preaching this, why Kenya too? We're already Kenyans. And you know, especially Australia is a misunderstood country. People call it Australia. Here, when they advertise, when you go to a touristic shop, they have shirts or souvenirs that say there are no kangaroos in Austria, because many people don't know Austria. Okay, but for me, the most important arm of diplomacy is economic diplomacy. How much can we gain from the other country? What can they gain from us? Politics, we can always talk. Multilateralism, we can always talk. But what is the benefit? Yeah. And so on the power of networking, I want to challenge all of us, and especially you, team, because you have the platform. Let us have networking sessions in terms of B2B, because from where I sit, the private sector are the ones who will make things move, not government. Never trade with government. Government is a facilitator. We will create a good environment, we will create a platform, but where? So please, I would like to see a business forum, because I've not seen one, in Kenya with Austrian businessmen. Okay, let us show them what we have. And I'll give you an example of this labor migration. When I was in Germany, and Ian, you know about it, we negotiated a labor agreement with Germany. So today, as a Kenyan, you can work in Germany, okay? And because, if you remember, Austria was annexed many years ago by Germany. So they followed suit. So we also have an agreement with Austrians. But there are some, steps that must be followed for you to be allowed to work here. And I think that presents a good opportunity for tech exchange, because that's, for me, the most important thing. But how well do we use that opportunity? How many African countries have an MOU with Germany, the biggest economy in Europe? What are we? How many Kenyans are moving to Germany? How many are moving to Austria? We are so good at talking, and we are so poor in execution. So that's the challenge I have for you, and thank you so much for having me here today. Asante.
You're on mute, Tim.
Can't hear you, Tim. Sorry.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Really appreciate those final remarks. Thank you very much, Dr. Karanja. Thank you very much, Ian and Mr. Main. Really appreciate you. I think in the interest of time, we won't take any questions, but I think just to summarize, key takeaways: Kenya is the gateway to East Africa. Talent, talent, talent. There's plenty of that in Kenya. And then strong sectors. I think this was Sandeep who mentioned FinTech, EdTech, HealthTech, AgriTech, Green Tech, and even security and defense technology. And then there are quite a number of existing Austrian strengths that are complementary. So thank you very much for making the time. For all those who've joined this call, we really, really appreciate you. Please reach out to us. I see there's a bunch of people on the call, including Michelle. Please feel free to reach out to us. We'll put you in touch with any of the speakers. We'll also send this video recording and the transcript as well. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye.